Well, here we go. Sorry, I don't use my cell phone for stuff like this all that often. You'd think I would be much better at this. So I found the chat, but I don't see the Q&A section. Is that on here?
It is, but we can just ask everyone to use the chat for questions.
Yeah, let's do that, because otherwise I'm not going to see the questions. I can't possibly be expected to work technology. I can only do so many things at one time. Anyway, welcome to the party, everybody, and hopefully you can hear me. Again, broadcasting from my Bellevue office, which was working earlier today for all the patients that I had to see, and now seemingly is malfunctioning. But what are you going to do? Onwards and upwards. So I am Dr. Leichliter. I can't see anybody that's on, so I'm not even going to try to figure out who's here and who isn't. For those of you who know me, welcome back to the party, or if you're my patient, welcome to the party. If you've never been here, I am a movement disorder specialist at Allegheny Health Network, predominantly out of Allegheny General. Sometimes I come here to Bellevue. Occasionally I'm in Wexford. You never know where you're going to find me. Question and answer session. Generally, I preface this by saying, again, this is not a great place for anybody to come for specific medical questions or medical problems. This is a good place to get general information. So don't send me a message that says, hey, I have so-and-so, I'm on this medicine, what do you want me to do next? Because that's a good question for your doctor, which you should absolutely bring up to them. This is a good place for general information. Hopefully I can give you some of that. We've actually had a lot of questions already come in. This is probably the most questions I've had ahead of time. So that's, an interesting and new finding here, or a new fun way that we're doing it. So I'll start with these questions. If you do have more questions, or if something comes up, put it in the chat feature, because I'm on my phone right now and for some reason I can't find Q&A. I don't know, probably on here somewhere, but I'm not sophisticated enough to find it. But I can find the chat section, so feel free to put it in there, and I will put up. Hold on, well, take it back. I just found the Q&A section. Feel free to put it wherever you want, and maybe I'll find the question and answer it. Maybe I won't. You never know. Generally, I preface all the things that I make up with kind of quotation marks. I like to think everything that I say is based in some sort of science. I'm going to give you the best answers that I can come up with, or things that I think are as proven as possible. But in all honesty, there's not always evidence to back up answers. You guys ask a lot of hard questions sometimes, and sometimes there's not a lot of information to go on. And if I feel like I'm just completely making up the answer, I will throw up some quotation marks and let you know. Without further ado, I'll get started with the questions that were emailed in, and please feel free to send in more questions and I'll answer them in the order they come in. So one of the questions I got was, what can you tell me about the use of medical marijuana to help with anxiety and or dyskinesias? And so a lot of you, if you're my patients, you may know I am a certifier of medical marijuana. I've been a certifier of medical marijuana for probably 4 years-ish, whenever it was approved. I was actually one of the first people to get certified. I'm pretty sure I'm the only movement disorder specialist in the near and far vicinity that's certified. And I have a lot of reasons for that, and not because I think medical marijuana is the cure-all and the miracle that people thought it was going to be. My success with medical marijuana for anything has been kind of iffy. I would say at most 50-50. People think it helps with something and they keep taking it. Of that 50% of people, maybe, another 50%, so maybe we're talking about a quarter of people that I certify continue to take it because it's worth it. And actually very few patients have come back to me and said, wow, my Parkinson's disease symptoms were much better with the use of marijuana. There have been a few things I've had some more success with, more so than the typical Parkinson's symptoms, i.e. tremor, stiffness, slowness of movement, and balance problems. And those three things are generally anxiety, which you brought up, pain, which is probably what it's used the most for, and sleep. So those are generally the three things that I've had some success with. And now you can imagine if you are a Parkinson's disease patient and you have tremors and you have stiffness and you're also anxious, you shake more. Or if you don't sleep very well, you shake more, or you're stiffer, or you don't move very well. Or if you're in a lot of pain, you don't move very well. And so if I am able to help, some of those other symptoms with marijuana, and secondarily, it helps from a tremor standpoint or a stiffness standpoint or a movement standpoint, so be it. That's kind of been my experience with again, anxiety, and dyskinesia falls into that as well. I mean, at the end of the day, dyskinesia is often a side effect of medicine. I actually think there was a paper that looked into that, and it didn't pan out that medical marijuana helped with dyskinesia. But again, everybody who's dyskinetic notices if they're anxious, they're more dyskinetic. And so if you are able to calm down some of these other symptoms, and again, the three that I've had the most success with have been anxiety, pain, and sleep. Sometimes secondarily, you're also able to help Parkinson's symptoms. And so again, I do think it has a role. It's not my first go-to. I don't think it's a cure. I don't think it's a fix-all or a cure-all or a miracle thing that the government is trying to keep from you because they really don't want everybody smoking marijuana. I don't think that's the case at all. It hasn't been studied. Again, according to the government, it's still Schedule 1, which makes it very difficult to study. And so you're going to have a hard time finding evidence. But at the end of the day, it does help some people with some things. So I keep it on the list of things I can use. The next question that I got online was, what are the pros and cons of delaying taking medications? And that's actually an interesting question because, again, there are definitely pros and cons to delaying the medicine. And so let's say you come to me and you've started having tremors or stiffness or slowness of movement, and, somehow you got to me without a diagnosis, because I feel like only the really complicated patients tend to come to me and the easy ones don't. But sometimes I see a new patient who hasn't been diagnosed with anything yet. There are pros and so if you come to me, I generally lay out, this is how I make a diagnosis. I don't have a medication that fixes it or cures it. I don't have a disease modifying medicine. There's nothing that says we have to put you on medicine. Most of you, if you are my patients, have probably heard me say something along those lines. And the reason is, again, there is no such thing as a disease modifying medication. The only thing that we think slows down disease progression or to keeps you better longer is exercise, which is my all-time favorite thing to talk about. If you've been listening on here, or if you come to me at all, you already know that. And so there is nothing that says we have to be in a rush to put you on medicine right away. I generally say, if the symptoms aren't bothering you, they're not bothering me. There's nothing that says you have to take a pill for it. We really come back to medicine when the symptoms are bothersome enough to try medicine, because I also don't have a side effect free medicine. That doesn't exist. The pros of delaying medication are you don't have to take medicine. Again, you avoid the side effects of the medicines. Less medicine is generally thought to be best. Medicines interact with other medicines. Again, there are definitely cons to taking medicines. What are the cons to delaying the use of medications? Well, that's a little bit tricky. So there's some data to suggest that quality of life is actually better on medicine. And again, that's not, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure that, which I'm not, to figure that out. Again, if we do treat your symptoms, generally your quality of life is better. Again, you're coming to my office for a reason, not for fun. And so theoretically, quality of life could be better if we put you on medicine. And so that would be the con of not taking medicine right away. It's that balancing, when is the right time to put you on medicine? What are we trying to accomplish? Which symptoms are we trying to treat? And how much are they impacting your day-to-day life? That's really how we make that decision. There used to be some suggestion that the earlier you started medicine, the earlier you developed complications like dyskinesias and motor fluctuations. And we think that that's actually more a side effect of the disease progression itself, more so than a side effect or a toxicity of the medication. And there's some data to suggest that, even if you wait to start medicine, or if you start with a different medicine besides levodopa up front, like a dopamine agonist or an MAO inhibitor, that eventually you ultimately end up in the same spot at the same pace. And so the data is a little bit iffy, but the jury's still out. But my philosophy has always been, when your symptoms bother you enough to potentially risk a side effect or a complication, that's when we put you on medicine. If your symptoms aren't bothering you that much, or they're not keeping you from doing things you want, like, or need to do, then I don't think we have to be in a rush to put you on medication. The next question that I got online, and I'm just going to keep going through the ones that we got online before I get to the ones that you guys have in person here, it was an interesting question. So I know I've talked about the difference between Parkinson's disease and Parkinsonism on here before, and that's always a question that I get a lot. And again, just as a brief overview, the idea behind Parkinsonism is anybody who has the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, i.e. this is the umbrella term like dementia, and Parkinson's disease is a subtype of Parkinsonism. It happens to be the most common cause of Parkinsonism, but it's not the only cause of Parkinsonism, much like Alzheimer's disease is a subtype of dementia. And so the distinguishing factors are really Parkinson's disease is the symptoms of Parkinsonism, but typical onset, typical progression, typical response to medicine, no underlying cause, things like that. If any of those aren't true, I usually label people as Parkinsonism and go from there. But the interesting question that I got is, what proportion of patients have Parkinson's disease versus Parkinsonism versus a Parkinson's plus condition? And I thought that was a really interesting question. So I actually tried to look it up to see if there was any data to support this, or if anybody's actually studied this or figured it out. And one report that I came across was that Parkinson's disease is about 85% of patients with Parkinsonism. And I forget which website I stole that off of. Don't quote me on that. I think I stole it from Parkinson's Foundation, maybe something else. I can't remember. It's online somewhere. And I thought that was a little bit high, but again, it comes down to your definition of Parkinson's disease or who's labeling people. So I happen to be particular in giving somebody a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. You really have to be fairly typical and straightforward for me to say definitively or fairly confidently, this is Parkinson's disease. If there is anything that is atypical, age of onset, progression, response to medications, other symptoms, underlying cause, I am much more likely to label somebody with Parkinsonism. Whereas, movement disorder specialists down next door or down the road or in a different state might be a little less stringent in their definition or their use of the labeling of Parkinson's disease. And so you have to take it with a grain of salt. So then I took it one step further, and I happen to actually keep track of all of my patients on a list that I keep on fairly on my own. I'm the only one who has access to it, so it's very private. And I've looked at, so I've been a movement disorder specialist for about 7 years now. I have about 4,000 some patients that I've seen over the past 7 years. I have labeled on my list, and again, so this is my own list, keeping track of what I think about, and these are all rough numbers, about 800 patients with Parkinson's disease. 500 I have labeled as Parkinsonism. And then the Parkinson's plus conditions are much less common. So I have about 20 that I have labeled definitively as progressive supranuclear palsy, 20 is labeled definitively as corticobasal syndrome, 15 definitively as Lewy body disease, and 10 definitively as multiple systems atrophy. Now, of those Parkinsonism patients, some of them probably fall into those other categories. So I don't want you to think, oh, he's not seeing any Parkinson's plus conditions. Believe me, I get my share. But that gives you an idea that those things are much, much less common than Parkinson's disease. And so if you do have Parkinsonism, most likely you have Parkinson's disease. And then there's these other things that just don't fit into any category. They're atypical Parkinson's, they're drug-induced, they're vascular, they're a Parkinson's plus condition, so on and so forth. And so that's kind of my breakdown in clinic. I feel I hope maybe that answered the question. I'm not honestly sure, but that was the best numbers I could come up with. Does change in season affect Parkinson's disease patients? Probably. I don't know that that's ever been studied or looked at, although it might have been. But the short answer is changes in seasons, particularly in places like Pittsburgh, where the change of season is dramatic, sometimes all in one day, affects everybody. So seasonal affective disorder is a real thing, particularly here in Pittsburgh. Everybody gets a little bit down when the days get shorter, it's darker, it's colder, it's harder to get out of your house because of snow or ice or whatever. And so I would say, yes, I do tend to see a trend of, I don't want to say deterioration, but maybe mild decline come fall, end of fall into winter. And part of it is, again, and I yell at people all the time about this, is exercise is so much harder to do when you can't get out of the house. Or, I just had this conversation with somebody today. A lot of my patients use yard work, going for a walk, outdoor activities as their way of staying active. And those things in general are much harder to do as the weather changes. And so just by the nature of not being as active, people tend to get worse. But there's also the mood issues. Again, vitamin D levels are low because sunlight's low. They're already low in Pittsburgh, but at the end of the day, it's even lower come winter time. And so, yeah, I do think that seasons do affect Parkinson's disease patients, much like they affect everybody else. I don't know if there's any data to support that, so I probably should have thrown up some quotation marks. But just in my experience, that does seem to be the case. Even though this is the next question, I'm actually going to save it for the end, and it has something to do with my expectation of a cure. The next question was a little bit interesting. What are the most promising emerging therapies for some of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, the fatigue, the tremors, erectile dysfunction, speaking, swallowing, writing? I don't know. I mean, at this point, unfortunately, they're not nearly as good as you or I would like them to be. I was just at the Movement Disorder Conference in September, so it's that 2 months ago, and I really wasn't blown away by any new or novel things. Research is always happening. Again, this is not new. That we're constantly looking at a lot of things. We're looking at symptom treatments. We're looking at disease treatments. One of the things that I think is going to be interesting in the near future is the use of technology. And so they're making a lot of wearable devices, a lot of tracking and sensory devices that are able to pick up symptoms that even aren't brought in, up by the patients because they don't recognize them. And so I do think you're going to see more use of technology. For better or for worse, because again, my patients aren't always the ones who like technology that much. But and as evidenced by today's talk, technology is not always our friend. But at the end of the day, I think that's going to be one area where you do see improvements. And I think that's going to be an area of high demand in the near vicinity. So again, the pandemic pushed forward teleneurology. So I do videos, video visits, we do video medicine with other hospitals. And so you're seeing the use of technology really be driven by necessity, particularly in the pandemic setting, which kind of escalated and sped up the process. But I think that's probably the area you're going to see the most emerging benefits. That's my guess. I've been a little bit let down in terms of medications. I just don't know. I'm sure there's some in the pipeline. There's always research going on in medications for all the things that you asked about. I've been a little bit disappointed in how quickly, again, much like you guys, everything takes far longer than we think it should to get to patient use, to get to even, advanced trials where we can actually do in-human trials and placebo-controlled, double randomized, blinded, blah, blah, blah trials. It just takes forever and it's very expensive. And so I don't know of anything overly exciting or promising emerging in the therapies, but again, my ear is always open. Your ears are always open. And we have to keep hoping that the researchers are doing as much as they can, as quick as they can to get us new things, the best they can. What is Parkinson's disease fatigue? That's a good question. And unfortunately, fatigue is the number one complaint I get coming to my office. And it's not just fatigue. It's fatigue, something called apathy, which is different than depression. It's lack of motivation. It's lack of desire to do things. I encompass all of these things together. And it's a really hard problem, and that's a really hard question to answer. So, I mean, the question actually isn't that hard to answer. What is it? It's a general feeling of tiredness, lack of motivation, not wanting to do stuff, period. But that is not the question that you're asking. Where it's coming from and what do you do about it is really what you want to know. And everybody on this call, all 64 participants, have some fatigue. I almost would be willing to guarantee it. Because it is literally the most common complaint and symptom that I get. And it manifests itself in a lot of ways. I hear about how tired you are. I often hear, I just don't feel like getting up and doing something. When you think about depression, it's lack of wanting to do things that you like to do, but generally you're upset about it. And the difference here is that apathy is the lack of want or desire to get up and do things you like to do, but you don't really care about it. And you're not really that bothered by it. And that really actually makes a big difference because depression is more treatable with antidepressants, whereas I have found very little medicine or success treating apathy. And usually another thing that I hear is unfortunately from significant others, which is, he used to want to do this, go here, do that. He ran a business. He ran 2 businesses. He used to work sun up to sundown. We used to travel. We used to do all these things, and now I can't get him off the couch. You can all put your hands down and stop nodding. I know that's everybody here. Believe me, I hear this so many times a day. I know I'm not making this up. I have a philosophy on this, or I have a theory on this. This is not proven. This is my own guess. So in Parkinson's disease, small tasks and small movements and things that you or I'm not going to call myself normal, that would be silly, but we'll say relatively normal people do not have to think about to accomplish. Patients with Parkinson's disease have to think about to accomplish. So if I want to stand up and walk out the hall and walk down the hall, or if I want to talk in a loud voice, if I want to swing my arms when I walk, if I want to write my name in a normal size, not that you can ever read it, but assume you could. I do those things without thinking about them. I just do them, right? My brain puts out enough dopamine and I do it. Patients with Parkinson's disease can't or don't. They can, I should rephrase, they can, but they have to think about it. So if they want to stand up and walk out in the hallway, they have to think about standing up. Okay, I have to push up. I have to take a big step. I have to swing my arms. They can talk in a normal voice, but they have to think, oh, I have to talk loud, or I have to enunciate, or I have to slow down my speech. Or they can write their name very big, but they have to painstakingly think about each stroke of the pen. And all of that thinking about things that you shouldn't have to think about is exhausting. And this is why I think I've run into the problem of treating this fatigue or this apathy or this lack of motivation, all of which I think is one thing. It's because it's not a physical fatigue. Everybody comes to my office and says I'm tired, but I know it's not. I'm tired because I just ran a marathon tired, or I'm tired because I just did a 2-hour workout and I'm tired. Although if that's the case, good for you. Good job. I'm tired because I have to mentally think about every little thing that I do, and that's very tiring. And I have not found a medicine that fixes that. I have tried dopaminergic medications. I have tried antidepressants, which work on serotonin and norepinephrine. I have tried working on caffeine or stimulants. I have not found a successful thing for that, with the exception of my favorite thing, exercise. Exercise is the only thing across the board that I've ever found that gives people energy and makes them feel better. Now, the hard part about that is, as you can imagine, you don't feel very good. You're tired. Who wants to exercise when they're tired, which in turn makes them not feel good, feel worse, less exercise, feel worse, so on and so forth. And so what I try to convince my patients is that if you can just try to correct that cycle, start by going for a walk, start by getting up and doing some exercise. It might make you feel better, which makes you more likely to exercise, which is going to make you feel better, so on and so forth, and turn that cycle around. But that is a really hard thing to get people to do, or to do in general. Take it from me, I have to convince myself to exercise every day, just like you guys do, and it's not always that much fun. And so at the end of the day, I think that it's a combination of everything that I just mentioned that really is what Parkinson's disease fatigue is. It's not just I'm tired because I haven't slept or I'm tired because I just ran a marathon. It really is a whole lot more than that, which makes it much more harder to fix. And I am still trying to figure out how to do that. I'm not all that close to it. Don't get too excited. I'm not that close to solving it. But at the end of the day, I'm working on it. Now that, but with the exception of one question, that was the end of the questions that got sent to me before. When I say sleep, do I mean insomnia or sleep problems? Do I mean insomnia, or do I include REM behavior sleep disorder? So actually, sleep problems in Parkinson's disease are a bunch. So insomnia is one of them. A lot of my patients have trouble falling asleep, staying asleep. REM behavior sleep disorder, or acting out dreams, or kicking and fighting and yelling and throwing themselves out of bed is another problem. Restless legs and periodic limb movements of sleep also come along with Parkinson's disease. And so when I talk about sleep disorders and Parkinson's disease, it's actually a whole bunch of them. This is, again, another big non-motor symptom that really does impact quality of life, because, again, as we've mentioned, if you're not sleeping very well, all of your other symptoms get worse. And there's some things we can do about each of those, from medications to melatonin to dopamine medicines to Klonopin to light therapy, which I've been trying to utilize a little bit more in my clinic, although it's just a hard thing to get in general. And because my knowledge of light therapy is not as good as I think it needs to be to really explain it to people, I wouldn't say I hesitate to talk about it, but it's much harder for me to talk about it just because I don't know the science behind it or all the details. But so there are some things we can do about it. It's just easier said than done. But yes, when I refer to sleep problems associated with Parkinson's disease, I'm referring to all of the above, because there is more than just one. Most of the recent FDA approvals are indicated for decreasing off periods. Have you had any success with one? Well, and so an interesting thought about that one is the reason why that's what you see most new drugs for are, in my opinion, with the advent of levodopa, which was back in 1968, 69, you'd have to fact check me on that one, but I don't know. We now have a good medicine that works. And so when you're doing a study on a trial, if you really wanted to show a medicine worked, you'd have to try it in a patient not on medication. And not that there's ethical issues about not treating people or treating people sooner with a drug, but you hate to hold off a drug that we know works. And so the easier way to do a trial is to have somebody already on medicines, because most people are going to end up on medicines at some point, and then add in another medicine to see if they do better. And so what that's going to prove is not necessarily that the drug works or helps Parkinson's disease or is approved for it. It's going to show that it decreases off times, or it improves in conjunction with carbidopa, levodopa. It helps patients do better. And so that's usually why you end up seeing that as the indication, because it's actually really hard to try a novel agent without being on other medicines to prove that it works. And so that's really what it would take to kind of get that type of an FDA approval. Not to say it can't be done, and that we do work on that. But at the end of the day, that's probably why you see that. It's much easier to treat people with another medicine so that you can say, well, it decreases the dyskinesias, or it decreases the off times, or it boosts carbidopa, levodopa in conjunction with it, as opposed to monotherapy on its own. Where can I find comparison of the advantages, disadvantages of the three DBS manufacturers? I don't think that exists, in all honesty. They've never been compared head to head, so you're going to have a hard time finding any studies that suggest one is better than another. And I'm not sure what the rules are, but I find it hard to believe that if you go to Medtronic's website, they're going to say, this is why I'm better than Boston Scientific and Abbott, or vice versa, only because I feel like companies would then have lawsuits about stuff like that. And I'm not sure there's any actual literature out there comparing one versus another. And so I actually think you're going to have a hard time finding that data. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, do a Google search or a lit search. I can't say that I've done one recently, But I honestly think you're going to have a hard time finding that answer, because I don't think that actual comparison where here's the advantages and disadvantages of each compared to the other actually exists. My personal opinion, if that's what you're asking, is that they're all fairly good. I've had good success with all three of the manufacturers of deep brain stimulators. So that's Medtronic, that's Boston Scientific, that's Abbott, aka St. Jude. They all have some differences, no doubt about it, but I don't know that that necessarily makes one better than another. And none of them do what I want, which is ultimately kind of, science fiction at the moment, and hopefully sooner rather than later, which is an all intracranial implant that is self-learning and self-programming that basically just takes care of itself, which is ultimately my goal. And I know everybody's working towards it, but I still think we're a ways away from it yet. But the short answer to that question is, I don't think there's an area, as far as I know, or a paper or a place that you can actually find that information. Your best bet is talking to whoever's going to, assuming that you're interested in DBS, talk to your neurologist. If you're my patient, come talk to me about it. I'll tell you what I know about them. If you're planning on going through surgery, then your surgeon is probably going to be the next best source of information to really go over the ins and outs of each, or which one they prefer. Surgeons, again, surgeons are surgeons. They all have their preferences. So they may have a better answer for that question. But I'm not sure that the information actually is listed anywhere as far as I know. My husband wakes up kicking very strongly. Could that be from? Absolutely, it could be from the medication. So it could be REM behavior sleep disorder, which is acting out dreams, kicking, fighting, things in sleep, which comes along with the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease or other Parkinson's-like conditions. It could, and oftentimes that is made worse with the medications that we use. It might not have anything to do with the medicines. And so that's a little bit of a tricky question to answer. I probably wouldn't treat it any differently or do anything about it differently unless that was really a problem. I would probably suggest, maybe like melatonin or something like that to see if it calmed down first, or maybe adjusting the timing of medicines. But that could be from the medicine. It might not be. That's tough to say. Can I explain the difference between Sinemet, ER, and Rytary? I can take a stab at it. Why not, right? That's what I'm here for. And yes, I know I'm past time, but I'm going to keep going because I can until somebody gives me the axe. I shouldn't use Sinemet. Carbidopa, levodopa, which is the generic term for all of these medicines, comes in about a whole bunch of different varieties. So the regular, i.e. Sinemet, the yellow 25/100 or 25/250, is the immediate release carbidopa, levodopa. That's really the gold standard medicine. It's been around for 50 years. That's the one we use the most. It also comes in Sinemet CR, or controlled release or extended release ER, which it's also been around for a while. This is a version of carbidopa, levodopa that is really extended, as the name would imply, extended release or controlled release, meaning it's slower released, it lasts a little bit longer. The difference between that and Rytary is a capsule that has immediate release and controlled release in one capsule, with the idea that it kicks in like the immediate release does, but lasts longer like the controlled release does, to try to get the best of both worlds. There's also a oral dissolving one, or a quicker dissolving or releasing one called Parcopa. There's also Ambrosia, which is an inhaled version. There's also Duopa, which is an intestinal infusion. And so the long answer is carbidopa, levodopa comes in a whole bunch of different varieties, and they all have subtle differences. And they're all, believe me, I use each and every one of these in different patients for different things. Israel leads the world in cannabis research. Well, I guess that's good for them. And believe me, I would love to see some actual research, actual reports. Again, I think it's going to be hard in this country to do an actual randomized trial of marijuana because it is still Schedule 1. I'm hoping eventually they will reschedule that. I don't know how it works in government terms. There's probably a way that they reschedule drugs. And if we can make it a less than Schedule 1 drug, then I think that would really help from a research standpoint, and allow us to get to the answer of what can and cannot do. But I think the jury's still out on that one. And you're right. I have had some patients where medical marijuana has helped with restless legs. I forgot to mention that one. I've had some where it doesn't work for restless legs, and so I'm not entirely sure why some, and it's probably variability much like everything else, but I've had some patients that really find marijuana to help with restless legs, and I've had plenty of patients where it did nothing for restless legs, and so that's a little bit tricky. They also bring up the idea of the Q1, which I've had a lot of patients ask about, and I'm still interested in seeing how this comes to this country, as it's still only available in Europe as far as I know. Which is a device that really is put on your chest and has some vibration to it, which is more of a cueing thing, hence the name Q1, to allow you to walk better. Again, I've gone to the company website, I've seen the videos, I'm optimistic, I'm hopeful, but at the end of the day, I think we still have to wait until I can get my hands on it and really work with it, which again, I know I'm trying to get in with the company so that when they do come here, we can work on this. But again, much like everything else in my world, everything has a bunch of red tape and requires my firstborn child first 7 times over. And I only have one firstborn child and I keep using him for everything. Can I say anything about the research being done at CMU about the new DBS protocol that I can't read. The new DBS protocol that uses short bursts of electricity, which is based on the use of the optogenetics in mice models. Yes and no. So I am not entire. I have met Erin Giddis. She's awesome. She has actually come and given us grand rounds and talked to us. I really like her. And she is doing tremendous work over at CMU with deep brain stimulators and optogenetics, where they use light to actually turn on and off certain cells at certain times. And they were actually having a lot of good work. The newest thing, which I've heard about, and in fact, one of my residents who wants to do movement disorders, who is currently rotating with me this month, so if you're coming to see me this month, you'll probably see her following me around, was actually on that paper. Because she was working with Dr. Giddis over there when they published or when they were coming up with this stuff. And so she's actually, I think, listed on that paper. The short answer is and physics, I'm going to preface this by physics was my worst science. So you got to bear with me. There are different stimulator settings. So you can change the voltage, the length of the stimulation, the width of the stimulation. There are different settings to the stimulator that we can adjust to try to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. And over at CMU, they were looking at whether or not you can get away with pulses or bursts, kind of like turning it on and turning it off of much lower settings than really we even use in our current deep brain stimulators. And they were actually having a lot of good success in mice. Now, a couple things about that. One is I always get a little bit worried when it's in mice because we've seen so many things that have been good in mice or rats or monkeys or cell lines that don't pan out in people. So I already cautioned my optimism first. Second is I was talking to actually our surgeons about this, and they were questioning whether or not the current DBSs actually have the ability to go that low in the settings. And I know they're working on this and it might be possible, I'm not sure. But the short answer is yes, I saw the research. I am waiting to see if this is something we can trial in people, which I think we will be able to. And then I'm interested in seeing how it goes. So again, anything that comes out of Dr. Giddis's lab, I always get excited about because she does amazing work over at CMU. And anything that seemingly is helping people with Parkinson's disease, even if it's surgical or medical, I'm always optimistic about. So I'm interested in seeing how that pans out. Hopefully that answered the question. I did not realize that apathy was, oh my goodness, apathy is such a common problem. And again, I encompass apathy with this lack of motivation, lack of energy, fatigue, just not feeling very good. And literally, this is the number one complaint. You are not alone. This is the number one complaint that I get in my office. And so it is so common. And I just wish, believe me, if I could find a pill for this, I could probably retire because I feel like everybody on the planet would take it. If I could find a way to capture the essence of exercise in a medication, I'd be a millionaire. How about intermittent fasting or following a gluten-free or keto type diet to improve everything? Well, if you read online, those things fix everything. I'm pretty sure they come along with world peace. My experience with them have been, they're helpful, but hard to stick to, particularly gluten-free and keto. So these are different diets. They're relatively thought to be healthy. In fact, the ketogenic diet is actually used as a treatment for some neurological problems, primarily in epilepsy, but sometimes in other ones, particularly in kids with certain genetic defects. But again, you get the idea. Gluten-free has been looked at as very healthy because it's thought that gluten, as well as a lot of other additives, or really a lot of processed foods, not surprisingly, probably aren't that good for you. I know that's shocking. Intermittent fasting, I haven't read as much about. I kind of actually do intermittent fasting, predominantly because I don't eat breakfast and oftentimes I'm working through lunch. And so purely out of the necessity to work, I sort of do my own intermittent fasting, and I think it's helpful. I think it's actually helped me stay, I don't want to say fitter, but I haven't gained as much weight as I think I would if I didn't do intermittent fasting or my own version of intermittent fasting. Is it right for everybody? Probably not. If you're a diabetic or if you have blood sugars that fluctuate, not eating for a while is probably not a great plan. In general, the diet that is presumed to be the healthiest is the Mediterranean diet. And that's the only one that I've seen actually have some evidence in Parkinson's disease, although there may be some smaller studies out there. Again, that's not going out on a limb because we think the Mediterranean diet is probably the healthiest diet on the planet anyway. So it's probably the best diet for everyone, although very difficult to do in Pittsburgh, I would say. Again, it's high in fish, high in olive oil, fruits, vegetables, olives, things like that, low in red meat, low in processed foods, low in junk food, low in sugar. Again, hopefully nothing I'm saying sounds outlandish for being healthy, because it's not. Hard to stick to, yes. Very healthy, probably also yes. Best diet for everybody, most likely yes. So these other ones I've seen less data to support, but again, there are some ideas that they are helpful. If you want to try them, I'm never against it when my patients say they want to try this or that or this diet or this idea. Again, they do help some people, and so you are more than welcome to if you're my patient, but you should definitely talk to your doctor about what you're trying to accomplish. Can you give some advice to someone who is afraid of their tremor starting on the other side? I mean, I can give you advice, but you're probably not going to like it. What's the nicest way to say this? I mean, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but it's probably going to go to the other side. If you do indeed have Parkinson's disease, generally tremor starts on one side, and after a variety of times, usually we think maybe a year or two, it spreads to the other side. That's pretty much the rule more so than the exception. And so again, I feel like I'm always the bearer of bad news in neurology, and particularly in what I do, I'm not usually the bearer of good news. But generally, I would expect it to go to the other side at some point. Timing is variable. I wouldn't be afraid of it. I would just pay attention for it. And again, these are things that we use to decide what are we going to do next in terms of treatment strategies. Again, how bothersome is it? How much is it impacting your day-to-day life? And what do we want to do to try to fix it? We want to start a DVS support group. That's a great idea. And we need more support groups. Does gastric mobility affect how fast? Of course it does. Sorry, I should really read the questions out loud before I jump to the answers. That's my fault. Does gastric motility affect how fast medication is absorbed? Yes. Is gastric motility affected in Parkinson's disease? Yes. I'm not telling you guys anything you don't already know, but your entire GI system is slow, top to bottom, mouth to rear end. Again, this manifests itself in a lot of ways. So chronic constipation is a big non-motor symptom. So it comes before the motor symptoms too oftentimes, but it's the entire GI system, from swallowing, gastric motility, gastric emptying, gut motility, constipation, small bowels, large bowels, it's all affected. And you can imagine, since this is exactly where your medications go, that it is indeed going to affect the absorption. If the medication is absorbed in the small intestines, but it takes a long time for your pill to get out of your stomach and into your small intestines, you can imagine how that's going to impact it. And so the short answer is yes, gut motility and your GI system absolutely impacts how well you absorb medications or how your medications are effective. And there's only so much we can do to adjust for that. But the short answer to that question is yes, indeed. Spoke with... Okay. Again, there's always trials in terms of deep brain stimulator. There's always trials in terms of medicines. And so at the end of the day, keep your ear out for more trials, more opportunities, more things coming up, and we'll go from there. All right, I'm going to use this as, well, hold on one second. Yeah. 3 more questions. How can I help my dad cope with new diagnosis? Support groups. That's probably and reading, learning. So education. The short answer is the more information in this case is usually the better. I mean, people don't always like more information, but I think more information is better. Again, the good part about patients with Parkinson's disease is they're fairly well educated. And so I feel like this is one group of patients where information is actually really good. Support groups are a good way to do that, but I've had patients where that's a double-edged sword. Some people really enjoy going to support groups and they learn a lot. Some people don't want to see other people that are either much worse than them or much better than them. And so support groups are not the thing for them. My personal opinion is more information is the best way to really learn about what you're dealing with and coping with it. The Michael J. Fox Foundation, the Parkinson's Foundation, Western Pennsylvania, the national foundations, these are all sources of good information. Fairly well vetted information. Support groups are usually good information. So more information is probably what I would recommend in terms of helping them cope with that. Oh, this is a good question. So when you say the medicine kicks in, what exactly do you mean by that? Mine never seemed to kick in. And this is not an uncommon thing either. So when I talk about kicking in and wearing off, what I mean by that is a lot of patients with Parkinson's disease, when they take a medicine, they feel it work, and then they feel when it's not working. That's what we usually mean by it kicks in, meaning you feel work, your tremors less, your stiffness is less, your mobility is better, and then it wears off. Your tremor comes back, you're stiffer, you're slower, you can't move. A lot of people have this up and down with the medications, but not everybody. And so that's usually what we mean when you hear us talk. And we use these words all the time. I should do a better job of explaining them. And that's usually what we mean when we say kick in, wear off. Sometimes you'll hear about unpredictable offs, meaning their pills just wear off when they're not expecting it, or a no on, which is usually pills kick in, but they don't feel themselves turn on. On off is another way that we'll say on, meaning your medicines are kicked in and you feel better. Off, meaning your medicines have worn off and you're not feeling very good. These are all words that you're going to hear us use to describe the fluctuations that come with Parkinson's disease. And not everybody does experience those, or not everybody experiences them the same. But that's what we mean when we say that. All right, last question, because my wife will get mad at me if I don't go home and help take care of kids. Have I heard anything about the results coming out of the Medtronic's closed loop controlled DBS trial going on now? Have I heard of the trial? Yes, and I know that they're working on it. Have I heard anything about the results? No. There was, I feel like I saw some information about this at the last movement disorder meeting, but I might be making this up. I might have seen it somewhere else. Don't quote me on that one. It's been an iffy day. I have not seen anything coming out about that yet. I know that that's the ultimate goal, right? A closed loop, meaning all internal, self-programming, self-learning, deep brain stimulator. Even if it's not all intracranial, if you have something that doesn't require adjusting or is able to learn, hey, this is what the brain firing pattern is when you're shaky or off. Maybe I should increase the settings at that time. Or, hey, this is what the brain firing patterns look like when you're on. Maybe we can get away with less stimulation. This is the idea behind closed loop, meaning there's some biofeedback that allows the DBS to adjust accordingly. I mean, this is the ultimate goal, right? This is what we want. This is sort of science fiction, but ultimately, hopefully, where we end up. I know that I believe all of the companies are working on something like this. How close each of them are, I'm not entirely sure. And the short answer is I have not actually heard anything from a trial or any results yet. So stay tuned for that one. Again, I'm as eager as everybody else is on that one. I really do think that's the future of deep brain stimulator therapy. And so again, I think at the end of the day, that's where we're working towards, and I will let you know when I hear more. And with that, Casey, I think I'm going to call it a day because technology just hasn't been my friend. And I hate to push it any further. So I will pass it back to you Thanks everybody for coming. Keep sending in the questions. As long as you guys have questions, I will continue to attempt to get on here and answer them for you. So keep sending them in, and we will do it again in another month.
Yes, thank you all. We'll see you next month at 4:45. No technical issues then. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.